My friend Tony and I decided to go out hiking one time in the early fall. We picked this area that we had previously never gone through before. It was a pretty nice and vast area that we could have easily gotten lost in if we weren't so used to what we were doing. Also, we were following alongside a river, so we would have to be pretty stupid if we couldn't find our way back out again. We didn't really know if this was a well-hiked area or not, but we figured it must be because there were some worn trails that were not very far away from the river. We stuck by the river the entire time though, just to be safe. We were going to be out for about a week. We hadn't planned on exactly how long the trip would take. We didn't run into any hikers though. One evening, close to the time we were putting up camp for the night, we came across this really wide lake-like opening in the river. We decided to make our camp there for the night. At one point though, when the sun was setting down, Tony thought he saw some movement in the trees off on the very far side of the river. He tried to point it out to me multiple times, but I have to admit that my eyesight is not as good as his. I didn't really notice anything, and I really didn't put much thought into it either. There was nothing unusual about having a few more hikers in the area. We didn't sleep right on the bank of the river. We made our camp and did our thing and went to sleep. I was awoken later in the night though by some sort of light shining right in my eyes. I didn't know what this could be, but it seemed really bright at first, and it was shining in from the direction of the river. The light was of course blinding as I opened my eyes. Tony had woken up before my eyes could even be adjusted in any way. When we both got some of our faculties about us, we were able to make out that there was more than one person just standing there on the beach. We called out, asking who this person was and if there was anything we could do to help them. However, no matter how many times we called out to them, we continued to not get any answer from the figures. They just stood there, shining their lights in upon us. It couldn't have been a lot of time that passed when we both realized this light was coming from a boat stationed on the river. The figures had gotten out of the boat now and were watching us intently. After a bit of time passed by though, they started getting back in the boat. When they were back in, the boat started sailing down the river. They kept their light shining in our direction right on us though, as they slowly went sailing away. Tony and I didn't do anything as we watched the boat and lights slowly disappear. After this very strange encounter, we both decided to try our best and just go to sleep. I don't think either of us had any real luck in that department though. In the morning, other than footprints all over the beach, the two of us didn't notice anything really out of place. It wasn't like in a horror movie where you find a scary message or something on the beach, but none of that made the encounter any less unsettling than it was. We no longer felt comfortable in those woods. What if those guys decided to come back for some reason? We headed back up the river that morning. Although we originally had no exact timetable set for this trip, we didn't want to spend any more time out there when we weren't feeling very comfortable with it and we had no idea what those guys wanted. We had some very unsettling nights out camping, but we never had one quite like that night. I've never lived in a very rural area in my life, although I have a lot of relatives who have. Most of the time though, they didn't live that far out in the country. There were always some people who lived not too far away. I do remember a short period of time though, when my aunt lived in a house that was actually out in the middle of the woods. It was like the sort of thing you might expect in a story about Goldilocks or something. I wouldn't say their home was a shack, if only because there was an actual shack right out behind it. During that time that she lived there with the guy she was with, us kids would either have to sleep out there or on the floor of the bigger shack they actually lived in. Although most people wanted to sleep inside the bigger building, when I was a teenager, I preferred sleeping in the smaller one. There was at least a cot out there, and I really did not enjoy sleeping on the floor. Not only that, but I also got to have some privacy and be out there all by myself. I had slept there many times before, so I was pretty used to it. There was one night, though, when I deeply regretted making that choice. I want you to remember this property was way off the beaten path. I mean, you might not be shocked to find D.B. Cooper still living out there. That's how off the path it was. I was never afraid of being out there in that old shed, but I did always put the hook on inside the door to keep anyone from opening it. On this night, when I was sleeping on the cot, I heard something strange that woke me up. It was someone shaking the door, as if they were trying to open it. At first, I thought it must be someone from my family, but when I called out to them, no one answered. I tried again, hoping the person would answer me back, but no response came. Instead, the door briefly stopped shaking, and then it began shaking even harder than before. It was as if whoever was out there was upset I didn't just let them in. It just kept shaking the door harder and harder. I found myself not yelling out to whoever this was, because for the first time ever, I was scared to be there. I didn't know if this was some crazy human out there or some sort of vicious animal, but my imagination was still running away from me. I couldn't call out for help from the house because it was too far away from the smaller shack to hear. There were no windows and only one door, which obviously I couldn't run out of because that's where the source of my fear was coming from. Other than cowering in the cot up in the corner against the wall, I had nothing I could really do. The door kept rattling for a while longer, but whoever was rattling on the door was not able to do it enough to get it open, and eventually the rattling just stopped dead in its tracks. Even after it stopped, though, I couldn't bring myself to unlock the door and go back to the house. I mean, whoever was out there could still be there, waiting in the dark for me to open that door and make a run for it. As had been the case so far, all I could do was stay in that cot cowering and waiting until morning. When I told everyone about what happened the night before, they all tried their hardest to convince me it was just the wind. I think other than that, though, they thought I must have been making it up. Who knows? But I'll always wonder what messed with me that night. This event has stuck with me throughout my entire life. This happened when I was in middle school, and now, being 23 years old, I still remember it as if it happened yesterday. I used to live in this house through 4th grade to my high school graduation. For most of my younger life living there, I had a loft bed in my room. I was also lucky enough to be given the room with a walk-in closet, since I had more clothing than my sister. This closet had a light switch on the outside and a lock on the inside of the door. At some point, if I remember correctly, I even put another lock on the wall so I could lock it from the outside. I'm not sure why now. Either way, I was very, very strict about sleeping with this closet closed every night. One night, I was sleeping on the loft bed and had woken up on my back. I was always a stomach sleeper, so I was already feeling a little bit weird. I was compelled to sit up slightly and look over to the side of my bed where the closet was. I could see the door was wide open, with the light on, and the inside completely empty of any of my belongings. The only sign there was ever clothing in there was a few pieces left on the ground and the path leading away from the closet, like when you do laundry and try to carry all your clothes, but a piece would fall out along the way. While staring at the open closet, a dark shadow seemingly developed on the carpeted floor below the threshold of the closet. From that shadow, a dark mass grew from the ground at a steady but slow pace. As it rose, it developed more features, grooves and empty eye sockets, teeth and a resemblance of a face. It rose until it stood just below the top where my closet door's height ended. It was a dark hooded figure with no real body shape. Its robe simply connected with the ground and melted back into its shadow. Under the hood was a protruding bleach-white skull with sharp teeth poking out in perfect symmetry. I stared at it blankly, feeling almost as if in a trance, unable to react or accurately process what was happening. After a few seconds of it existing in my space, it lifted its stare to face mine from the top of my loft bed. We held what eye contact we could, with its empty black voids in place of eyes. Against my will, I felt my head turn down and lightly nod to this figure or something. After a second, it returned that nod and began to descend back into the shadow it had risen from. I watched as it slowly disappeared from existence until eventually the shadow didn't even exist anymore. Only then did I feel whatever force was compelling me to not be able to do anything let go, and I fell backwards onto my back and instantly fell asleep again. I woke up the next morning to find my room completely normal, closet closed, lights off, and full of my possessions once more. Yet I remembered that night's events and the feeling of it vividly. I still can now. Since that night, I've never experienced that same scenario or anything similar to it. Now, I'll admit some things about myself. I've never sleepwalked in my life, not in my childhood, and not in adulthood either. The most that happens is I talk and laugh in my sleep. I dream almost every night though, and those dreams can be very vivid. I often wake up from them and have to take a second to realize I'm back in reality. I always know the difference between sleeping and being awake though, and that night I swear I was awake. My eyes were fully open, and I couldn't move my body as I wanted. I've talked to some people and they suggested I either had a night terror or a bout of sleep paralysis. Whatever it was, I try not to think about it too much, as it was very unsettling for me. I'm a 20-year-old female, but the story I'm about to tell happened when I was around 7 years old. To give a little bit of backstory, from the ages of 4 to 12, my family and I lived on a heavily wooded 14-acre property in the south. As a child, I loved playing outside, and more specifically in this old car trailer my dad had that was parked right beside our house. In fact, I had this oven-like thing in there for me to play with and whatnot. Now, prior to the super creepy part of this story, there was one day I noticed this strange black trash bag at the end of our gravel driveway. My parents thought it was best not to mess with it, but my great aunt and uncle who were coming to visit decided to bring it over to the house. Since it was so long ago, I don't remember everything that was in it, but I do remember there being several doorknobs, some extremely disturbing writings, and a military uniform. After we found these things, I would say a few months later, my dad found some evidence that someone was living on our property without our permission. It was almost certainly the owner of that trash bag. I remember my other great uncle who was living with us at the time, either seeing someone watching the house one night or finding more of his stuff out in the woods. Maybe it was both of those things. To bring it back to the creepiest part though, I got up one morning on the weekend to go out and play in the car trailer as I usually did. Instead of my play oven being inside though, I noticed it was out in the woods, about 20 feet away from the trailer. Being so young, I was definitely more confused than scared after noticing this. I'm pretty sure I went and asked my parents right away if they knew why it was out in the woods like that. Of course, they said no. We figured out it was the person who was living on our property that did that later. I recall looking out into the woods in that moment and feeling as if someone was watching me. Being older now, what freaks me out the most about this situation is not only the fact that he got so close to our house, or that he threw my toy into the woods to lure me out there, but realizing that all those random doorknobs in that trash bag must have been because he'd been breaking into people's homes. I'm a student at a preparatory school. I always go home using the bus around 6 or 7 p.m. One evening, me and my friends were getting ready to go our separate ways from school. I walked over to the bus stop when I noticed an old man, mid-50s, short hair, around 5'6". I had never seen him before at this particular stop. I thought maybe he was new to the place. We got on the same bus, and as always, I sat in the very back. I noticed, though, him staring at me and giving me this big, weird smile. I tried to pretend not to notice him by going on my phone to scroll through my Instagram. Once I was getting ready to get off, he got up and got ready to get off too. Out of nowhere, he grabbed my hand as I was holding on to the bar. That scared the shit out of me. I shook my hand off and rushed out. That was when I saw he was following me. I took a different path to make him lose me, when all of a sudden he began to shout and scream at me. "Stop running, son! Why are you scared?" I walked home and explained the situation to my parents. They were very concerned as well. I didn't think anything else would come of it. The next day, I was sitting in my room, since I was quite sick that day. I was playing some CSGO when I remembered hearing some weird sounds outside. I walked outside and noticed that very same man from yesterday was right outside my home. He must have slept outside waiting for me. I immediately ran back inside and notified the police. Since then, I've never seen him again. I don't know what that was all about. I had a theory that maybe he had dementia or something and thought I was his son, since he called me son while shouting at me. I still remember this like it was yesterday. I remember having a typical mundane day in our calculus class. The promise of spring break was tantalizingly close. Some restlessness had taken over the classroom as we waited to taste our freedom for a few months. Our teacher, known for his laid-back behavior, was deciding to inject some fun into the class. He introduced a brand logo quiz on Sparkle, which was a welcome break from the usual routine. "Alright folks, let's have a little bit of fun before the weekend, why don't we?" our teacher announced with a big smile. That moment of relaxation was short-lived though. The tranquility of our classroom was shattered when the principal's voice suddenly came over the loudspeaker. His usually calm demeanor had a tone of panic to it, and his words sent a chill through the room. "This is not a drill. All teachers proceed with lockdown," he urgently declared over the loudspeaker. A sense of foreboding washed over the room. Our teacher, typically easygoing, seemed to be in distress as he hurriedly dimmed the lights and herded us to the safety of the corner. There was an eerie silence as we waited. I remember the hum of an electrical panel in the back room being the only sound I could hear. The moment stretched on, and it felt like every shadow cast a long feeling of dread. "This can't be real," one of the students muttered. The agony of the situation escalated. We began to hear a man's screams echoing down the hallway. I remember panic seizing me as those wails grew louder and closer to our room. It was impossible to stay composed then when this man began pounding on all the lockers outside, screaming threats in at us. "I'll kill all of you!" he screamed. The fear for our lives consumed us as the frenzied man walked right over to our classroom door and began to bang and tug on it. The screaming and crying of some girls in the class only served to scare everyone even more. The pounding persisted. Time seemed to slow down in that moment. "Is this really happening?" I remember another student whispering. After many minutes of his tormenting screams and relentless banging trying to get in, they receded into the distance. We felt a bit of relief, but we remained very on edge, waiting for the terrible shoe to drop. The principal's voice filled the room once more, explaining this unsettling situation. Apparently, the mentally unstable intruder had walked right in the front door and attacked the woman at the front desk, sparking chaos and alarm. He repeated once more to remain in lockdown. As we learned more, it turned out the man had recently fled from authorities and just happened to run into the school to try and escape. The school was left grappling with the haunting knowledge that he was still lurking somewhere nearby. "Stay calm, everyone. The police are on their way," the principal reassured us all. The man's intrusion, though, had left a mark on the school, and we were left to wonder about his whereabouts. As students, we all realized that safety can't be taken for granted, even in the most ordinary of moments. To this day, I don't know what happened to the man who caused our harrowing lockdown. He escaped out of the school before the police arrived, and he didn't actually end up hurting anyone inside, other than the lady at the front desk. I like to believe that he was caught and is now receiving the help he so clearly needed, instead of being lost in that mental darkness forever. At high school, I made friends with some guys from a nearby town, and I often traveled there to spend some time with them. One night, one of them said to me that there was an abandoned meat plant in a secluded part of the town, and we should go there again to explore. Some of my buds had already been there before. I was a 16-year-old who loved adrenaline, so I thought that was a real great idea. After some hesitation from a few of the others, everyone agreed to go. One guy led us, and I found the path a bit odd. I mean, when the place was active, they probably transported products and/or animals with trucks and such, but it would be very difficult for a truck to pass through here. We walked down this long, narrow dirt road, surrounded by fields and forests, with absolutely no lights or buildings anywhere nearby. This place was in the middle of nowhere. After like 10 to 15 minutes of walking, we finally arrived, hopped the fence, and decided to check what was inside. We explored the whole place, which was pretty fun because they'd left everything behind. Machines, workwear, etc. To be honest, nothing paranormal happened there or anything, but we did find two things very strange. For one, the place had been abandoned for more than 10 years at the time. However, we found a big barrel in the yard that appeared to be filled with some sort of guts and blood. It didn't really look fresh, but it also wasn't decaying either. It was quite strange. Every door was also unlocked except for one. That door looked brand new, while all the other doors were old and battered. The room didn't have windows either, so we couldn't see what was inside. There was also another later discovery by someone who regularly went to that place. A couple of other kids had broken the padlock on the gate to get inside one time, only to find that days later another padlock had appeared. Anyways, it was quite a fun experience, and it became a habit to go there every once in a while. The very last time we were there, though, was in February of 2017. It was 2 weeks after our last visit, when we saw the police were there. We heard that some kind of crime had occurred at the meat plant, and the police were searching for somebody. I never got the full details on what happened. There's a small news portal that dealt with what was happening in this area, but they didn't even publish about the incident, so we tried to find it on other sites. There was absolutely no information about this place on the internet, as if it never existed. There were some rumors that multiple bodies had been found inside, and somebody was using the place as a dumping ground or something. Either way, I don't think I'll ever go there again. Back when I, male and 18, graduated in 2021, I wanted to take a gap year, well, as much of one as you can take in America really, to focus on myself after the pandemic. My godfather had also passed away while visiting us due to some hospital malpractice. I was already in a lot of grief and staying inside more than ever. My brother, male and 25, was working at Petco and met a sweet old lady that needed a dog sitter. Somehow, I ended up getting an interview to dog sit. As a dog owner, I had a lot of experience caring for them. I should have left, though, the second she told me my worth was only $2 an hour and that she'd pay bi-weekly because she could pay anyone to dog sit for $10 an hour. I reluctantly accepted as it was a job, and she insisted I stay over 12 hours a day. I always think about how much I could have made back then if I just knew my own worth. Anyway, as the interview went on, she brought up this ex-roommate of hers that she had kicked out in a heated argument. She ominously told me, if anyone knocks on the door, do not let them in. Lock the door every day when you first get in, and only open it for me. Obviously, this terrified me, but my people-pleasing kicked in, and I felt like I needed to care for this sweet old lady. To my luck, at least the job was actually somewhat fun. I got up early, and she was actually really chill. I only needed to walk and feed the dog twice a day, and otherwise I could pretty much do whatever I wanted in her big home. This lady was obviously just very lonely. She had this giant house and a ton of food just in case people ever came over. She insisted I feed them boiled chicken from this pot that I had to reboil every day. For the rest of the day I dog sat though, I had this 3,000 square foot clean house with 3 bedrooms and nobody to bother me for 12 hours. I didn't have to worry about my home life, and I could do anything I wanted. I thought nothing could go wrong here. But I was wrong. What happened next terrifies me to this very day. For a good 2, maybe 3 months, everything seemed to be going fine. But in the back of my head, I always thought about that lingering fear of her ex-roommate. One day, I came in and everything was normal, but I got this weird feeling that I should not go outside with the dogs yet. I was a bit physically disabled, so it was very taxing on my body. Then it happened. There was a soft tapping at the front door. Huh, that's weird. Do male people usually knock? The tapping continued. "Leave the box at the front door, please," I yelled out. My heart then sank as a response came. "Hello? Can you let me inside?" I looked over, only to see this lanky, tall, white man with a weirdly cut toupee and dead eyes looking in straight at me from the window. He began to tap on the window right in front of me. "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you. Please, I have a package here." I tried to ignore him and told him he needed to go away. "Oh, no, I'm not a bad person. My friend is your boss." My heart skipped a beat. I noticed this was the exact same man she had been talking about, and he was not going to be leaving easily. He told me he only needed to come in for 1 second and began to walk around to the back. I told him I'd call 911 if he left my sight. He calmly laughed in my face. "Wow, it's all right, buddy. I just need my pillow, yeah. It's in the other room. Only I know where it is." I tried to reason with him, but he refused to leave. I called the dog sitter lady. She picked up, and I told her he was trying to get inside. Like the great boss she was, she just told me to not let him in and don't trust him. At the same time, she tried to act like he was completely harmless. She told me she would be getting off at 3, which was the earliest she could. That was in 4 fucking hours, so instead I called my dad. My dad showed up ready to square up with this guy and started yelling at him. The man slowly creeped by him until my dad said, "Back the fuck up, dude, or I'll beat your ass." Luckily, the guy took this as a sign and moved away, but said that he'd be back for me for supporting my boss later. At that point, I just left. I wish I could say that was the end of my time there, but for a short while it wasn't. This story's already pretty long though, so I guess that's a tale for another time. This just happened, and I'm still pretty shaken up by it all. This evening, whilst putting away some clothes in my closet, I noticed the entry point to my attic had been disturbed and was set slightly ajar. I live in a condo with my wife and child. Our master bedroom has a walk-in closet with an access point/lid or whatever to our attic. I don't believe the attic connected with any other condos, but we did share walls with neighbors on both sides. As I was folding and putting away laundry this evening, my wife walked in from the connecting bathroom. She had come to ask me something when all of a sudden she gasped and said, "Look up." My blood turned cold immediately. There it was. The entry point drywall lid was lifted out of place and set ajar. She had been giving our child a bath at the same time, basically right in that area where you could see from the attic. I froze for a moment, not knowing exactly how to handle this situation. I got a hold of myself though and dialed 911 while I rushed my wife and child to go downstairs in a hurry. Both of them got ready and moved out, while I stayed on guard watching the entry to the attic crawl space. The police showed up after what felt like an eternity. They checked up there, but they couldn't find anything. There were no signs of forced entry, just an obviously lifted and placed ajar crawl space cover. Now I'm here alone, wondering if we overreacted or what the fuck exactly happened. Somebody obviously moved the door. It wasn't bumped or hit by myself or my wife. It was too high up, and my child was not able to get anywhere near the access point either. The creepiest thing that bothered me the most, though, was there was no way to tell if it had been moved from inside or from the closet below. The police said the drywall that connects up there wasn't broken or cut up or anything, so nobody had snuck into another condo. There were no signs of fiberglass disturbed near the entry or around the closet either, so no one was obviously crawling around lurking or messing shit up for a long time. I'm seriously thinking about placing a lock on that entry point somehow, but I'm not good with that kind of handiwork. I wouldn't even know how to begin cutting or making a sturdier lid to even try to put a lock on one. Now, I'm not going to say this is paranormal, but I also had a disturbing dream about the situation a couple of weeks after. In my dream, a woman seemingly called me on random one day and kept repeating, "Is there someone inside your house?" I panicked and rushed everyone in my house out the door. I had my wife out front with my kid. I can't remember if we found anyone or anything in my dream either. Just a very unsettling bonus experience, I guess. It was a strange night to say the least. This goes back to 2016, but since I'm new here, I thought I'd post and see what y'all think, because I don't really know what to think about it. I, 31 and female, bought my first home back in 2016, on my own as a single young woman. I was so proud and excited, especially after leaving the toxic guy I was with the previous 5 years, on and off though. It was a fresh start that I really needed. Anyways, I moved in. Just me, no roommate, and my ex had never been there before. The house was a small 2-bedroom rancher, built in the 50s but updated a bit. It had a dirt crawl space for storage, and a huge fenced yard with 3 gates. A metal gate, a smaller gate to get to the front door, and an old wooden gate to pull into the covered garage area. I'm a nursing student, so I do a lot of night shifts. After living in the house for a few weeks, I got home from said night shift. It was 6 a.m. and just starting to get light outside, when I noticed there were apples scattered all over my front yard. Not apples off a tree either, like store-bought apples with the stickers still on them. They'd been thrown haphazardly all over my front yard. I was kind of tired and brushed it off as kids messing around and went right to sleep. A few weeks later, I got off another night shift and everything seemed normal, as most mornings were. I went to bed soon after. I had a house sitter the weekend prior, as I'd gone on a girls' trip with some friends. So the house sitter had some people come over to have drinks. That was totally fine, but they'd left the cans in my fire pit. When I woke up after that sleep that day, I went to let my dog outside to pee in the backyard. I noticed that all the cans, as well as burnt chunks of wood, were laid out in a perfect circle outside my fire pit. That seemed quite odd, but I just kinda thought it was those neighborhood kids messing around again. Another few weeks went by, and again I got off the night shift. I pulled into my driveway, only to have my heart sink immediately. I could see all my gates were wide open. They had all been closed and latched up tight when I left. Something just felt off this time. I was tired after a long shift though, and told myself not to get freaked out over stupid kids being annoying. I didn't have enough strength to stay awake anyway. That following weekend I had off. My cousin wanted to go to the movies, so I agreed and she came to pick me up. When I left, I put my dog in the house, locked the door and left the porch light on since it would be dark when I got back home. When I arrived back, I found my dog outside, the door completely unlocked, and the porch light had been turned off as well. The lights inside were on though. This time I was real freaked out. I called my dad to come check out the house. For me, I was convinced someone had done this from inside, that someone must be living in my crawl space or something. He came and checked for me immediately, but there was nothing to be found. I ended up getting a roommate to ease my mind a little and feel a little bit safer. A guy from work was looking for a new place to stay, so I offered for him to room with me for cheap. He accepted quite readily. He was a big dude, so I felt whoever was messing with me would think twice with him living there. I was wrong though. One night I was home alone, as my roommate was working a night shift. I fell asleep on the couch while watching a movie, only to wake up to a missed call from a random number. I googled the number since I had never seen it before, and noticed it was from one of those apps you could download to call or text anonymously. I tried calling it back to no answer, but then seconds later I got a text, much to my surprise. "How's the movie?" I asked who this was. "Who do you think it is?" I asked my roommate if he was messing with me, but he replied from his normal number. "What are you talking about?" I told the random number to cut it out. It wasn't funny anymore. They continued to say things to me as if they could see me right now. I was super creeped out and ran over to my window and closed the blinds. They then told me that if I wanted to come outside, I could see who it was. I ran to my door and locked it right away. Then they replied, "It's me, Corey." I didn't know any Coreys though. I ignored the texts and I guess they eventually got bored of tormenting me. I waited until my roommate got home so I could sleep. Nothing ever happened again after that, and I still live in that house with my now husband. No explanation for any of it has ever come up. I'm genuinely open and curious to hear everyone's opinions on this. I was about 14 at the time and walking back from school. Unfortunately for me, I have to walk through a fairly sketchy area to get home. As I approached the underpass, I saw a man coming out on my side of the path. He immediately crossed the road to the other side. I lost focus of him and started looking at the floor. I continued to walk forward when I suddenly got this feeling of unease. I looked up, only to see the man was now sprinting full force directly towards me with a needle in his hand. The thing that freaked me out the most, though, was his face. He looked so furious, as if he absolutely hated me from the bottom of his heart. I've never had such a feeling of panic and fear prior or after. I got cold sweats instantly, and I could tell this man wanted to kill me. I started sprinting straight away, not daring to look back at him. I'm a fairly overweight person, so I didn't think I had much hope of escaping, but I still had to try. After 5 minutes of doing my best running, I looked back, only to see the man was now gone. I'm not sure why, but I rang up a friend of mine straight away and told him about this. As I described the man to my friend, he instantly knew who I was talking about. He was a local crazy who had terrorized the other locals for years, in and out of prison for various things. I've had nightmares of people sprinting towards me ever since. I'm not sure if this incident translates well into text, but it was a truly terrifying moment in my life. I don't know what he would have done if he actually caught me, if he simply would have killed me or done something even worse. I, 16 and female, have been skateboarding ever since I was 13. Getting catcalled, shouted names at, spat on, being hit on and stalked was a lot for my young age, but I learned to deal with it eventually. One of my first ever encounters with a boy, 14 and male, was a great time. I was with my group and he was a friend. Me being 13 at the time with a 14-year-old wasn't so bad, but I still felt a little bit uncomfortable. After a couple of hours, my group decided to drop off one of our friends and grab some snacks. We all said bye and left the skate park. However, 2 guys followed us. My friend that was leaving ran to her house, which was understandable. The rest of us were creeped out, but stood our ground to go over to the shops. When we came out, I saw them once more. I told my group to skate away down the hill, and we did. Before I left, I asked one of the boys to go away. They both tried to attack me. They dragged me with them behind the shop and started physically hitting me and trying to especially touch me. I screamed and cried and tried to fight back. I got pushed down onto the floor. In front of me was my board. I grabbed onto it and knocked one of them in the head as hard as I could. I then tried to run off. Because I was so hurt though, they still got to me. Luckily, my group came back and heard me screaming. They fought the boys off, and I was left with some severe bruising on my face. I never saw them again after. However, yesterday, now 16, I saw those same boys. I had made more friends since then and had good relationships with some other guys. We were all there when I recognized them. I told my friends we could leave, and they said no. I felt uncomfortable and didn't want to be there. Thankfully, we left later. It was near 11 when we all came back to our hangout spot. We decided to go home and come back out tomorrow, but I didn't really want to. I went home and went straight to bed. For some strange reason, I woke up around 4 and looked around my room. There they were, at the end of my bed. I started panicking and crying. I immediately grabbed my phone and put the torch on, but nothing was there. I stayed up that entire night until it was morning. I think it was some trauma or hallucinations induced by my experience. I'm really scared ever since this incident, and I don't know if I should go out again. I'm 24 years old and female. This is a bit hard for me to write out, but I think it's important to address. My parents split when I was very young. Neither my dad nor my mom really had their act together, which in turn caused me to not have mine together either. From a young age, I was drinking and experimenting with recreational drugs. I was falling into a cycle that my family had always been stuck in. My mother had a tendency to sleep around with anyone that would give her the time of day. This meant inviting some really sketchy guys into our home. I think it's important to mention that she was obviously a drug addict and didn't consider the danger. I had been arrested a few times before the age of 15, either for fighting or underage drinking. I was a real mess. One night, my mom and her occasional boyfriend were waiting up when I stumbled in drunk. This was the moment I realized I needed to change. My boyfriend's mom hit me and then pulled me into another room of the house. My mom started banging on the door, begging him to let me go. To this day, I will still never forget the sinister look in his eyes. It gives me chills just thinking about it. It was the face of someone who wanted to do something bad to me. It was this sketchy little smile that I swear is burned into my brain. He whispered something along the lines of, "I'm about to show you why it's bad to let your mom worry about you." I screamed and he kept coming at me, but I put up a good fight. After a couple moments of struggle, I scratched him across his face. That's when he really became enraged. He began to furiously attack me. Thankfully, my mom had already phoned the police, and he was arrested before anything serious could happen. There was this one cop that was always present whenever I got in trouble. He was around 60 at the time, I think. I remember he was always giving me shit for my behavior. That night, he was there as well. My mom got taken into custody along with her boyfriend, so I was sitting and waiting with him while they were getting my story. Then he said something to me I'll never forget. "I'm really sorry about all of this. I'm sorry, but you're not going home. It's time for you to change. You don't want to end up like her, do you? You want to be somebody, right?" I told him I did want to be somebody. I wanted to break that cycle. I was put into foster care, which was a horrible experience at first. It ended up being just what I needed, though. Me and that cop became best friends until he passed away about a year ago. I always went to him whenever I needed guidance. I'm happy to say I've been a corrections officer for the past 2 years because of him, and I'm pleasured to honor his memory by pursuing a career in law enforcement. Losing me was what my mom needed to get her act together too. She's been sober almost 10 years and remarried to a wonderful guy. Hopefully this story is somewhat encouraging to all of you who feel lost out there. Last night, my roommate and I made a last-minute decision to go night swimming at the river in our city. It was around 8 p.m., so there were still a few people hanging out in the area. It was quite dark, though. About 15 minutes after we got there, I saw a man shining his flashlight, seemingly looking for something near where we'd put our things. I told my roommate, "Hey, keep an eye on that guy." I said it semi-loud. He obviously heard us and scurried away. I began to feel a bit anxious, but I waited a little bit to say something to my roommate. Eventually I did, and we decided to leave. We packed our stuff up and began to walk up the staircase that led to the parking lot. We were using our flashlights to see the steps when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dark shadow dodge into some bushes at the top. I stopped, grabbed my roommate's arm, and said, "Nuh-uh, nope." I started walking back down the stairs. I told my roommate what I'd seen when we got to the bottom, and she said it was probably just a tree blowing in the wind. I started getting the strangest feeling in my stomach, though, one I never had before ever. I just knew that if we went back up those stairs, something bad was going to happen to both of us. I stood at the bottom and began to shine my light up at the top, trying to see if I could find anyone there. Sure enough, I saw the outline of a man for a split second. As soon as the light hit him, he ducked behind the bushes again. Obviously, I went into full-blown panic mode. I started looking around for other people, hoping someone could walk us over to our car. Luckily, we found a couple not far from the steps. They walked us, but seemed quite annoyed about it. When we got to the top, the man was nowhere to be seen. A few hours after we got home, I got a notification on my neighbor's app, the Ring doorbell app that sends crime alerts for your area. It said that someone had been stabbed, only a few streets away from where we were. I'm 100% certain this guy's intentions were bad. I don't know if he was planning on kidnapping us or robbing us or what, but I just know something really bad would have happened if I hadn't been paying attention and we walked up those stairs. Not sure if he was the person that stabbed someone, but that notification just served to scare me even more. I still feel sick to my stomach because of all of this. My friend and I are underaged, a little buzzed from party hopping all night. We roll up to Wendy's and ditch the empty bottles of Smirnoff Ice as we wait for our food at 2 a.m. in the drive-thru. I had no idea it was illegal to be out past a certain time if you're under 18 unsupervised. It was past 12 in Arizona. I catch a text from a friend, and she asked me to get her order. We'll meet at this intersection and she'll eat with us. Okay, sounded chill enough. I got to the intersection, and there weren't any gas stations or grocery stores nearby, just some creepy buildings and a dirt lot. I stupidly picked the dirt lot to wait for my friend, who called me. "Hey, I'm at the intersection. Are you okay?" "Oh, I see you. Is that the cops behind you?" Oh no, I discovered the cops in fact were right behind me. Luckily, the car smelled like food and not booze or cigarettes, but obviously the cop would know I was under the influence. I had a large bottle of rum that had already been opened. I tried desperately to hide it under shit from my car before he knocked on my window. He was not stupid though, and it's fucking Arizona. No one gets away with a DUI in Tent City Central. The cop asked me and my friend for our parents' phone numbers. My friend's mom gets a call to come pick her up and gets a verbal lashing from the cop about being underage past curfew. He explained the citation, so I already knew what was coming. I, however, didn't have a voicemail set up on my new Nokia fat phone and refused to give my parents' house phone, back when these were still everywhere. I told him they simply didn't have one, only a cell number. I put it to silent as he repeatedly called. I told him they were probably out with friends themselves. The cop said okay and explained the ticket to me, and I thought I was going to get away scot-free when he told me he was going to follow me home. I made sure to go the speed limit and not make any errors, but I was shitting myself right now. I parked my car out front of my house. My parents' cars were in the closed garage. The house was dark as well. I was thinking it was a success. It looked like no one was home. The cop proceeded to park his car right next to mine. Hey, you could have broke the rules a little while getting home. I wasn't going to pull you over twice now. He followed me to the front door. I unlocked it and nervously said thank you. Instead of ringing the doorbell or doing their famous police officer knock though, he followed me into my home and locked the door behind us. He was talking to me, making small conversation and checking out my living room. I was starting to freeze up because now I was suddenly sensing a very different energy from him. He asked me where my bedroom is and told me to take him to it. Instead, I took him to my parents' room and turned on the light. I was 100% thankful to see my sleepy-eyed parents, shocked to see an armed grown man behind their young daughter. He let out a little breath and whispered in my ear, "You lied to me, sweetheart." He went back into police mode, telling my parents he'd found me out in an illegal time and that I'd need to pay a fine and attend a class as well. It was so embarrassing. I was 18 by the time I had to take the class with a bunch of 12 to 14-year-olds anyway. I never told anyone until now about the comments he made to me. My dad did ask him why he was in our house. I told him I didn't understand that either. He never read me my rights. He just followed me home. Before he left, he said to me, "That's a nice house phone you have right there. Looks new and shiny." That was the last thing he said before letting me go. I can't help but think back to that night and think about what could have happened if I had bad parents who weren't home, or parents who were out of town or something. I know there are good cops out there. I personally know some myself. I go back and forth with being freaked out or thinking maybe he was just being thorough. I don't know. Why don't you let me know what you think? I'm interested in hearing varying opinions. This story happened when I was younger and braver, and did a lot of stupid things without thinking beforehand. It's quite a wild ride, and it's all true as well. I used to work at a pizza shop down the street from 2 p.m. until closing. I usually didn't get off until 11 or so at night because of this. I did have a car, but it was close enough to walk, so I mostly did that to save gas. This particular night, I was doing my usual thing, jamming to one of my playlists and very tired. I was happy to have such a good job though, and generally happy with the way my life was going. Up ahead, about a block or so from my place, I saw a pretty attractive guy in dark clothing walking around. Not with much purpose really. He was taller than me, about 5'10" to 6 foot-ish or so, and had shaggy brown hair. The closer I got to him, the more I could tell he was really good looking. Like even in the dark of night, I could feel myself blushing a little. His features kind of escape me now, but I do remember his hair and thick eyebrows. I took an earbud out, and because I'm from a dangerous city and never really cared about stranger danger, I decided to talk to him a bit. Hey, how's your night going? Oh, it's good, just looking to get drunk. Oh, that I can help with. I've got a mini bar at my place. I live just down the street if you want. That was not exactly verbatim how the conversation went. During the walk back to my place, I didn't really get any red flags from this guy either. He seemed totally normal and was actually pretty nice. I was honestly thinking, wow, through sheer luck I met this super hunky guy that seems cool and fun. I was beside myself really. We get to my apartment on the second floor. I jump into host mode and offer him to have a seat and make himself comfortable. The apartment was about 640 square feet in total, so it was pretty small. Except for the bathroom, you could pretty much see the rest of the apartment from any area inside. I headed into the kitchen, and while I was pouring the drinks, I glanced back over at him out of curiosity. It was then that I noticed the first red flag. As I was asking him questions, he was more delayed with his answers, especially more so than he was on our walk there. He was starting to act kind of odd. I go back over to the couch, pass him his drink, and sit down next to him. "So, what do you do for work?" I asked. "Oh, I'm not here for sex." He put down his drink on the table. "What do you mean? I'm not here for that either." He stood up. "What you got?" he asked me. His nice guy vernacular and friendly face were now gone. I was having a hard time understanding what he meant by that. I said, "What you got?" The second I stood up, he pushed me backward. I basically got knocked off my feet, hitting the floor but not hard enough to get knocked out or anything. I jumped right back up, but he'd already grabbed my laptop and my work bag. As I started towards him, he cut around me and made his way toward the front door. I was right behind him when he made it outside. I managed to grab a hold of him, and we tussled again in front of the door. Now I shouted out, calling on help from the neighbors. It was late at night though, so no one came. "Please help, I'm being robbed!" The thing is, he had my laptop. Not just any laptop, I hate to admit it, but my entire life was on that computer at the time. Important photos I didn't have backed up, thousands of dollars in music programs, video game programming stuff for a development team I helped, really expensive software. It was in my mind irreplaceable. I gave chase down the stairs across the dog walk park, and as I started to gain on him, we tussled again. The only thing I could focus on was my laptop. I knew I had to, at any cost, get that computer back. That was all I cared about. Somehow I got a grip on it. I tugged at it again. I guess he decided it was not worth all this struggle. He got up and started to take off once again. I realized he still had my work bag, which had my cell phone and my wallet in it. I ran after him again. This time he shouted back at me, "Follow me and I'll stab you again." This made me stop in my tracks as he got away. Underneath a street lamp nearby along the sidewalk, I immediately started to inspect myself. I was stabbed? No way. There was no way that just happened. Then I saw blood running down my leg. I saw blood pouring down my arm too. I saw 2 places where he cut me real good. I was scared, but the blood made it look worse than it was. I decided that was enough. I got my laptop, and that's all I really needed anyway. I hobbled back home, got inside, and locked my door. I called the cops using my neighbor's friend's phone the next day, and filed a police report explaining the situation, showing the stab wounds. I also declined medical services, since I couldn't afford that at the moment. In the end, all that guy got was a crappy cell phone and a wallet with like $30 in it. The cop called my friend back several days later and said they were not able to find the guy and that they would keep me posted in the future. That was years ago, so I don't know where the robber is now, but I have every electronic thing of importance backed up on multiple drives to this day. I live in a big city. It's not where I pictured living, but finding a job in a small town like the one I grew up in just was not working out. I'd gone to community college a few towns over, since it was the only higher education school within a 50-mile radius. There were not exactly many options. Pretty much no options, actually. I didn't consider moving for school, since I had no money and my parents had only offered to pay for my schooling if I stayed home while attending. They were the extremely controlling type. They even still tried to give me a curfew when I was 20 years old. I put a stop to that mentality pretty quick though. Maybe it was the fact that I'm their only child, but I had to let them know that as an adult, they couldn't tell me everything to do anymore. It was quite hard for them to accept at first, but they learned to respect my boundaries, and I learned that compromise in a situation is sometimes better than arguing. Eventually, I graduated with an associate degree in journalism. I was extremely excited. I knew I didn't want to do anything in the political field. Those journalists are hated so much. I wanted to write about something a little more lighthearted and fun. I wanted to work for a magazine, maybe fashion or something like home decor. It seemed more fun than business or finance or politics, where everything is so deadly serious all the time. The only problem was, there were no writing jobs in my area. The only options job-wise were the local grocery store that people started working at when they were teenagers and never left, or the gas station where all the junkies hang out all the time. Neither of those sounded like appealing options exactly. I didn't want to be one of those people that commute 3 hours to work a day either. Since the city was the only real place that had options, I decided I'd move finally. At first, I didn't know where. I'd considered Los Angeles, but all the writing jobs down there were about celebrities. You know, OMG, he went where with her? Such meaningless drivel in my opinion. I thought about Seattle, but then I remembered the awful weather they have up there. Rains all the time. No thanks. That's when I settled on New York City. I found a couple of places that were hiring for writing positions. I was absolutely interested in all of them, and I applied to them all as well. Of course, I was hoping that even one would take me at that moment. I wanted it more than anything in the world. I'd already found a room to rent in an apartment with 3 other girls for a reasonable price, by New York City standards. Everything in me was telling me this was going to be a good thing, but man was I wrong. I don't know if bigger cities just have more creeps or if they're all just really bold, but sheesh, I hated all the unnecessary attention I was constantly getting literally everywhere I went. Even just walking up the street or up the stairs to my apartment, I'd be harassed everywhere. It was uncomfortable and really started to get to me. My roommates all told me it was normal, and if I wanted to live in the city, I'd have to learn to get used to this. That just made me even more angry about it all. That it was something so normal to be experienced there, something to just be brushed off and forgotten about the second it happened. It's not like there was anything I could do about it though. I was too scared to say anything back to those people. I guess I did eventually get used to it, and I learned to ignore it as well. I'd gotten a job for a pretty well-known magazine. I wasn't exactly writing any star articles, but I was excited to be there nonetheless. I got a paid internship. I didn't make much, but the experience and opportunity to learn was worth it. Unfortunately, the harassment didn't stop when I entered the workplace. It was actually somewhat worse. The men in the top positions in the building felt emboldened by their status, and obviously knew no one would do anything to them when they did something anyone else would consider wrong. I found myself in an awful position, in a place where anyone I told would just tell me to keep my mouth shut about it all, and that the stuff I was saying wasn't something anyone talked about. There was this one day, after I'd been working with the company for about 6 months, when I was called into one of the higher-ups' offices. I knocked before entering and was told to come in. I noticed right away he was an older man, probably in his 60s. He sat at a large desk in front of a huge window with the most beautiful view overlooking the city. He must have seen me staring, because he offered to let me stand by him to get a better look. I thought it was a nice gesture. I made my way next to him and stood admiring the city I now called home. He was sitting directly next to me and had turned his chair to join me in looking out the window. That's when I felt it, his hand traveling up my thigh and making its way up the rest of my butt. I don't even know the words to express my feelings in that moment. It was a mixture of a bunch of emotions. I was angry at the fact he felt he could touch me, scared I was alone in the room with this man, and shamed that it had been about 30 seconds and I still hadn't swatted his hand away. I was scared of what would happen when I did. I couldn't let it go on any longer though. I pushed away from him and asked him what he was doing. He pretended not to know what I was referring to, and like I had made the whole thing up. After arguing with him for a couple of minutes, I decided going to HR was my best option. I made my way to the elevator and pressed the floor I was going to. The second the doors closed, I burst out crying. The elevator dinged and signaled it was my stop. I got out and made my way to the office, where an older woman was sitting behind the desk. I told her there was something I wanted to report, and she very bluntly told me that if it had anything to do with the guy who had just touched me, there was no point, and I should get back to work. I was confused how she knew that's what I was there for, but eventually I understood. I wasn't the only person he'd done this to. I wasn't the only person who'd come to HR to try and report him either. I was always told that whenever something like this happens, to tell someone about it to get help if I needed it. There I was trying to do exactly that, and the person who was supposed to help me was adamant to drop it. The next day, I was called into his office again. I was only an intern, and whenever the other male interns were called in, he would only ask for coffee or for them to run some paperwork. When he asked for me, I would always ask one of the guys to go for me. I was scared of that man and what he might do if I stepped into his office again. Later that day, I got an email from him. It said something like, "The next time I ask for you, it better be you who comes. Don't forget, I can end your career in the city before you can even blink." It was intimidating. Of course it was intimidating. There I was, a 21-year-old girl, faced with a man telling me he was going to ruin my career if I didn't do what he asked. The next day, obviously he asked for me again. I entered his office and stayed right by his door, so I couldn't give him a way to get close to me, and I had a quick exit if needed. He began telling me about articles the magazine had published the day before. He sounded weird though. The way he talked wasn't his usual manner of speaking. He began to stutter and his body was shaking. I only realized what he'd been doing when he let out a loud moan and rolled his head back. Yeah, he was doing exactly what you think. I yelled at him that he was disgusting and ran out as fast as I could. Honestly, I didn't care about that internship at that point. I didn't care about anything that man had to say about me around the city. I could find another job somewhere else if I had to move. I didn't care, but I wouldn't let him get away with what he was doing. I went to the police and they told me that without proof there wasn't anything they could do. I filed a report anyways. I went back to the apartment and told my roommates what happened. Of course they were as creeped out and disgusted as me, but shockingly told me to keep the internship. They said the job was so good that having to put up with one pervy man was worth it. I tried complaining to HR again, this time insistent I be moved to a different floor. I was willing to try to find a new job, but I kind of needed this one to pay rent while I looked for a different one. I was moved a few floors down, and for the next couple of weeks after that I had no issues. That's when the emails started coming in. They were always from a new anonymous email address, and every single one always contained a nude photo, always from the same person. Unfortunately, I could tell. I informed the police, who again told me there was nothing they could do. I started hating everything about that city. I hated how everyone told me this was normal and I should put up with it. I wanted someone to listen to me and agree that what I was going through was not okay. I knew who was sending me those photos, and I couldn't take it anymore. I sent an email to everyone in the office detailing what had happened to me. I explained everything I went to and how many times I'd tried to report it to HR, and they did nothing to help me. Then I quit. For the next few days, I got emails from other women in the office telling me they had experienced the same or similar things with the man who had touched me. I was mad that no one would do anything about it, but at least everyone knew now. I never went back, so I never saw the fallout from my email myself. I hope he got what he deserved, although I know he probably didn't. I found a job at a different company that I adore working at. I'm treated great and can gladly say I've not experienced anything like that since. To any woman out there who's going through or has gone through something similar, and they feel like there's no one out there who understands or who listens, just know you're not alone. I had a freaky encounter when I was in high school. Although this happened many years ago, I still remember it just as if it had occurred yesterday. It wasn't the first day of fall, but it was definitely the first day that felt like fall, if you know what I mean. I was in school on a Monday. I lived in town, so I walked to and from school. Upon first stepping outside, I noticed two things. The leaves had started falling from the trees, and there was a cold breeze in the air. The sky was overcast as well. I went back inside and quickly grabbed my jacket, knowing I would need it today. It was such an odd day. It's almost like I didn't really feel like I'd woken up at all. I guess that's the only way I can describe how I felt. Everything was just off. I couldn't really pay attention in class, and spent almost all class looking out the window, watching the leaves fall down. I felt like it was going to rain soon. The clouds in the sky were very dark, and the wind was picking up during the day. It was during my 5th class that I noticed someone. It wasn't unusual to see people walking along the sidewalk in front of the school during the day. What was unusual, though, was to see someone pacing back and forth in front of the school. If pacing was even the correct word for this. There was a tall man, very slender. He was dressed almost like a hiker. He had on boots and a backpack and just kept walking back and forth. He'd walk from one end of the sidewalk of the block my school was on, turn around and walk completely back to the other side. He just repeated this over and over and over, several times. All the way till I was done with the class even. I found it so odd and even a bit creepy. It put images of him as a possible sexual predator into my head. I assumed if this was really the case, though, he wouldn't be making it so obvious. I tried to just put him out of my mind as I went to lunch. He could just be a purely normal guy having a walk to think to himself or something. The first class after my lunch was also in front of the school, though. Sure enough, when I went to my class, the pacer was still there. He was walking back and forth on the block looking at the school. I was surprised, as I really had put him out of my mind. I would have thought that anyone else who had been pacing in front of the public school for hours on end would have been talked to by a passing police car or something by now. That must have meant they'd decided there was nothing wrong with the guy. I was still disconnected from the day, though. This time I was less daydreaming, though, and wondering what this strange man was up to, if he indeed was up to anything at all. I just couldn't get it out of my head for the entire time I was in that class. I don't think I heard a single word my teacher said. When it ended, I still couldn't get that weird person out of my head. I went off to my next class still wondering. After school, I had play practice. I stayed later than most of the other students to help another actor practice his lines. By the time I was ready to leave, the sun had already begun to set. The school looked completely deserted. There was a light mist in the air as well, although it had not yet rained. I left out the side door of the school and walked on the sidewalk that led back behind the school. I had to walk that way in order to get home. It was quite damp out, and the leaves were blowing hard in the wind. I knew I'd feel a lot better when I got home. Only, when I looked up ahead of me, I saw what looked like the very same guy from earlier. The pacer was somehow still around, and he was walking on the sidewalk in my direction. I began to feel a little bit uneasy. Still though, I realized this guy didn't know me or anything. He also didn't acknowledge me, and didn't seem to look at me as I walked on. For some reason, he still made me feel very uncomfortable. I couldn't explain exactly why. I felt something so off about this guy, I decided to avoid him. I went slightly out of my way and turned on the street that led into the neighborhood beside the school. I wanted to walk around the block and get back to the street I was on further down. I was still feeling something uncomfortable though. I felt like I was being watched or followed perhaps. It was irrational, but I felt it so strongly. I turned around and looked behind me to check, only to be surprised that the pacer had turned down the very same street I was on and was now following me. I chalked it up to a coincidence. He surely just happened to turn down the same street as me. When I got to the end of the block, I turned right. When I'd gotten halfway up the street, I once again felt a need to look over my shoulder. Sure enough, he was still right behind me. There was a faint possibility it was still a coincidence. However, when I made a third turn and headed back to the street the school was on, he turned again. That showed me he was following me. Then, when the street came up, I turned halfway down the block and looked over my shoulder, only to see he was indeed following me. I decided to run back to the school. As soon as I began to run, however, I slipped forward on a wet leaf and fell face first onto the sidewalk. I got knocked silly. Suddenly, I felt someone grab me from behind. Immediately, I knew it was that pacing guy. I tried to pull away, but he kept a solid grip on my arms. I was basically still on my hands and knees anyway. Then, the guy started whispering to me that I needed a new arm. I didn't know what he meant, but he was really hurting me. I wasn't a weakling though, and once I'd finally returned to my bearings, I was able to flip over and kick him away from me with my feet. The man didn't even fall over. He just stopped trying to pick me up. Then he grabbed his backpack and held it in front of him. Opening it up, I smelled the most revolting stench I'd ever smelled in my entire life. He reached into it. However, before he pulled anything out of it, the porch light of the house we were in front of came on. A man rushed out of the house with an aluminum baseball bat in his hand and threatened the man to get away from me. It took a few moments, but he eventually put his backpack on and turned around and left. Once he was gone, the man from the house came out and helped me up. He even gave me a ride home. I never saw that pacing man again. I always wondered what he meant about needing a new arm and what he could have been reaching for in that backpack.